Hello and welcome back to my channel. My name is Judy and I love history, travel, and I have an insatiable curiosity bump. When something doesn't make a lot of sense, I do ask questions. Maybe the problem is I don't understand properly. President Macron of France claims the Seine will be safe enough for the Olympic swimmers by the summer of 2024, and that he'll swim it to prove it. Anne Hidalgo, the mayor of Paris, is also participating, or at least she claims she will, in this exhibition. Who thought of this first? Will either one of them follow through? Will either one of them be able safely to follow through? Can the river be made safe enough to back their brag? Let's find out today on an armchair journey. President Macron is not universally loved in France, but he has promised, and he said so in this video, that he will swim the Seine. The commentary I've read about this ranged from the hilarious, it's already polluted enough, to unprintable. I don't believe, based on the comments, that most people think he will do it, but that certainly doesn't mean that the French haven't made an enormous amount of progress toward the goal. Let's take a look at the situation and see what's possible. Paris has known since 2017 that it will be the site of the Summer Olympics this year in 2024. It found out after a bidding process that saw several cities actually withdraw their bids, leaving only Paris and Los Angeles as the final contenders. So you could say that the City of Lights actually won by default. Preparations altogether will take a full 7 years. The only decision left over was deciding which city got the nod for 2024. I don't know if it played into it, but the last time Paris won the Olympics was in 1924 for the 100th anniversary, during or shortly after which the Seine River was declared so filthy that no one was permitted to swim in it. Getting the nod for an Olympic site is hugely prestigious, not just for a city, but for an entire country. It's also extremely expensive, and in many cases, the host sites never recover their investment costs. Los Angeles actually managed to turn a buck on this in 1984, repurposing existing infrastructure. That could be why they were willing to give it another shot. Barcelona did quite well in 1992 as well, and used the opportunity as an incentive to reimagine and rebuild large chunks of the deteriorating city. Most cities, however, seem to lose money on the deal, with cost overruns, costs greatly exceeding budgets, graft and corruption, leaving the local taxpayers to pick up the tab. The French are determined to come out at least even and possibly ahead on the deal. I've read that they are repurposing some of the existing venues, possibly some of those you see in this map from the 1924 extravaganza. They're building an Olympic village, which will be converted into apartments, and generally doing things a city ought to be doing on its own, including fixing up infrastructure and transportation to meet the increased demand, and also working on a more modern demand, creating a useful post-Olympic recreational space by cleaning up the river and making it fit for public use. Rivers provide enormous political, economic, and even cultural benefits to the humans who live nearby, although I have to admit we don't treat them very well. The Seine River, shown here, is no exception. Humans initially settled on the two tiny islands in the middle of the river, marked here combined as the Ile de la Cité. The river provided a handy physical barrier between settlers and any intruders who would think to invade, rob, or pillage. It provided a reliable supply of clean drinking water, a way to move from area to area, and a way to dispose of waste. As the city grew, the river got more traffic and more use, and a great deal of it was unhelpful to the river's health. Agricultural runoff from both upstream and downstream deposited animal waste and probably worse in the water. Manufacturing plants along the river profited by not paying to dispose of their refuse, but by just dumping it, along with various chemicals, including cadmium and lead, neither of which is very good either for the fish or the humans. As the number of people increased, more and more raw sewage was dumped into the water as a consequence of the sewage treatment plants not being able to keep up with the demand. By 1970, when I first visited, and possibly a very long time before that, the river was basically dead. Fish couldn't survive, and on a hot day, wowzers, did it stink. Swimming was illegal, and I'm pretty sure if you tried it, you'd land in a hospital and get your stomach pumped. Since then, the health of the river has improved remarkably. It doesn't stink anymore, and the fish are back. In 2009, Paris actually nationalized its public water service, creating something called the Eau de Paris, and in doing so, launched a new model what they call sustainable water management. The idea is that it will be in charge from the source to the tap, classifying water as a common good instead of a profitable commodity to be bought and sold. That allows it to guarantee low prices for users and a sustainable water management policy, as well as fixing up the infrastructure required to maintain and safeguard the water in the river. I think it probably also gives the officials authority to go after, fine, and possibly jail the profiteers responsible for any future contamination and dumping. In this case, the French government is sinking an estimated €1.5 billion into the Olympic cleanup project. Some of the work includes regulating what people can dump in the water, building new water treatment and sewage plants, and in downtown Paris attempting to fish some of the garbage out of the riverbed. Left to its own, with no further dumping, the river will eventually clean itself, but the French are going to help it along a little bit. They're in the business of a major cleanup. They know it can be done because they've done it in miniature at the Canal Saint-Martin, which we'll visit next. The real problem, I think, for the French is not whether this can be done. You can accomplish almost anything if you have unlimited time, unlimited manpower, and unlimited funding. To be honest, most of the time, all you need is 2 out of 3. Cities change, and over time, so do property values. There's a very pleasant canal today called the Canal Saint-Martin, which connects up to the Seine and runs through a neighborhood of the same name. 50 years ago, the first time I visited Paris, this quarter was a rundown, dangerous, and verging on a slum. The canal was disgusting. It also stunk. I know that because I was here and remember that I went despite being warned quite clearly. I was 20 and spoke just enough French to grasp the warnings that I shouldn't go there at night. The canal was commissioned originally by Napoleon in 1804 to bring fresh water in the city, and as such it represented a real improvement for the Parisians. Unfortunately, the residents didn't take very good care of it. On average, since that time, Paris has drained and cleaned up this canal every 15 years or so. Nowadays, the job involves not just draining sections one at a time, they close it off into manageable chunks with temporary dams, but rehoming all the fish, cleaning it out, refilling it, and putting the fish back. This photo from around 1865 and the story behind it gives you a glimpse of the magnitude of the problem. The photographer was a man named Charles Marville. His job was to document the rebuilding of Paris by Napoleon III and his city planner, Baron Haussmann. Napoleon's plan was to convert the city from medieval gridlock to a city of wide boulevards, monumental vistas, and excellent public infrastructure. Among the plans were the grand boulevards that plowed through what were once winding streets and overcrowded slums, which Haussmann had demolished. Eventually, the Parisians got tired of his work, and the work stopped. This is La Bièvre, an open ditch that was a sewer system for, and I had to look this up, 24 tanneries, 21 leather factories, 9 starch and 3 dye manufacturers, a paper mill, 2 cotton and 2 flour mills, 4 laundries, a soap and candle factory, and other assorted industries. Providing proper disposal for the enormous amount of industrial waste generated by these companies was something the owners of these establishments never even thought about. Why should they? The streets and the sewer system were free as far as they were concerned, and there was no cost attached to them filthying the place up. Shortly after this photo was made, the canal was simply covered over and tied to the Paris sewer system. History hasn't told me whether the polluters were told to stop, or charged a fee, or even fined. It was a great plan. I think the trouble is that the Parisians stopped right there and didn't allow for the fact that the city was going to continue to grow. The population of the area in and around Paris tripled in the last century, and the infrastructure literally has not been able to keep up. The Seine River cleanup efforts, the most recent ones, actually began in the 1990s when the river was so dirty and so polluted that it was basically dead. Even fish couldn't live in it. In 1990, former President Jacques Chirac, who was then the mayor of Paris, promised to clean up the river, saying he would personally swim the Seine in 3 years, but he never did. He was the mayor from 1977 until 1995, so he had plenty of time to accomplish this. That said, the city did make some progress, and since that time, fish have actually come back and are living in the river, although I don't think I would catch and eat one of them. Still, the river remains far too polluted to swim in, although people do, as you'll see when I get to the section on the Paris plages. Garbage and dumping are a small part of the problem. The river is chronically polluted with bacteria because the sewer system cannot handle the overflow and occasionally dumps raw sewage directly into the river. The plan is to reduce that from the 12 times it occurs in an average year down to just twice a year. This is a long and expensive process, but the French have made progress, as you can see in this photograph from December 2023, showing people paddling on the river. Whether they opted to paddle because of the cold or because it's still contaminated with fecal coliform bacteria and isn't safe to swim in was not reported in the New York Times article. If you think of a river as a resource, a community resource rather than a dumping ground, your view of it might change. Parisians actually love beaches, and Paris beaches, or Paris plage as they're called in French, pop up along the banks of the Seine River, the Bassin de la Villette, and other locations, including, I think, the Canal Saint-Martin. These are official, sanctioned, sponsored events. Enterprising businesses add a temporary wall and sand to make the experience more real, then rent umbrellas and beach chairs. You'll note from this discussion that someone still is profiting from the river, but the people profiting from a cleaned-up river are quite different from those who profited previously. That would be the polluters and garbage dumpers, who are now being replaced, at least in part, by people who provide the amenities to the beachgoers. The one opportunity these sun lovers don't have yet is the opportunity to actually swim in the river. As you can see in this photo, even if swimming were permitted, and for now it remains banned, there would be no easy way to get from the temporary beach area into the water, and getting out would be even harder. Emmanuel Macron and Anne Hidalgo are elected politicians, and neither one of them is a fool. I think the best way to think about this is that there are actually two brags. The first and most important is, can the Parisians clean up the river sufficiently that it's safe for people to swim in it? The answer to this one, in my opinion, is yes, and in fact, from my research, they're almost there. The national and city governments and the political leadership is literally betting the farm on this one. If they have to cancel those Olympic events, it's going to be an enormous embarrassment and black eye to everyone involved. The French set aside the money, let the contracts, made the promises, and most of the work is done. If it works, it's going to be a remarkable achievement. This river has been closed to swimming for at least a century and probably should have been closed to swimming for another century before that. The dumping and sewage problems I've shown you have been ongoing. The river, however, moves along at 2 or 3 miles an hour and eventually will clean itself if they can stop the dumping problem. But that involves finding and sanctioning the dumpers and building sewage processing plants appropriate for the size of the city today. Apparently, the entire clean up the sewage so you don't get sick from drinking the water part of the plan wasn't enough to capture the imagination of Parisians completely. Some of them, or at least representatives of the press, needed something glitzier, and I believe that is how the president and the mayor got backed into making the brag about swimming the Seine personally. As of the posting of this video, the city still has some time to complete the work. 3 test events in the Seine last year had to be canceled because of elevated E. coli bacterial reading. For heavy rainfall prior to the Olympics could still result in the events being canceled, organizers have had to admit. The second part of the challenge is, will Monsieur Macron and Madame Hidalgo actually swim it? I admit I have no idea about this one. Politicians don't think like you and me. Each one of them promised they would, but like Jacques Chirac before them, neither one of them actually gave a date. For now, though, the safer proposition might be to swim in a separate pool, like this one, named for Josephine Baker and anchored in the river. Thank you for joining me today to learn a little bit about how the French are planning to clean up the Seine River so it can be used for Olympic swimming events. Come back next time for another adventure with me here on The Armchair Traveler.